and welcome to DIA is Asking. The topics of health, well-being and naturalness are highly topical for all of us at the moment. You know, since the beginning of 2020 at the latest, we have known that health is a self-responsible topic where you really have to look out for yourself. What is really good for me? And in order to be able to make this decision on one's own responsibility, one naturally needs information. There is a flood of information and we can look at it all. Where do we get this information? Who do we believe? And knowledge is a debt to be paid, and my approach in this series is to help you gain more knowledge and to gain more understanding of all the topics around health, well-being and naturalness that are popping up everywhere right now. For me today, it's, the topic zeolites. I have invited a wonderful guest who is very knowledgeable in the fields of homeopathy, physics, chemistry, vibrational medicine. So he really is an absolute all-rounder. Welcome, Silko Günzel.
Thank you so much for letting me be with you again.
Yeah, today is the first time in the new series DIA Asks. And I am particularly pleased about that because I know that zeolite and the closely related topic of silicon is your absolute favorite topic right now, along with colloidal metals and, much, much more. Silko, today we would like to deal with the topic of zeolite. At the moment, you see advertisements and offers everywhere on the subject of zeolite. And I always have the feeling that I can't really make up my mind. It's all colorful here. And so today I want to focus a little bit on the question, how do I personally find the product that really makes sense for me, where I know why I have chosen exactly this one product? And maybe, let's start at the beginning, zeolite. I'm sure we've all heard of it, but what exactly is it?
Well, zeolite is an aluminum silicate. That is, it is a volcanic rock that is microporous, that is, with a very porous surface. And the volcanic rock zeolite consists roughly of silicon compounds, which is why it is also called a silicate of aluminum and oxygen. This means that the three most common elements on Earth form an extremely stable structure and combine. And that is zeolite, an aluminum silicate.
Interesting. When I first hear that I should put aluminum into my body, all alarm bells go off, because we are actually interested in getting all this stuff out of our body, right? Can you please explain that to me?
This is precisely the task of zeolite. That means the combination of aluminum and silicon and oxygen is an extremely stable lattice structure that requires temperatures of over 400 degrees to break down the structure. That means it's extremely stable, extremely hard, which is why, among other things, aluminum is not extracted in nature via zeolite rock or aluminum silicates, but via the much rarer bauxite, because the aluminum can be dissolved out much more easily than via zeolite rock. This means that the zeolite rock as a volcanic rock is of natural origin, an extremely stable compound that is not attacked by the normal stomach acid in the stomach, and also requires temperatures of over 400 degrees to break down this compound. This means that there's no danger of any large amounts of aluminum getting into the body. On the contrary, many metals, heavy metal compounds, are bound to the zeolite and above all, aluminum.
Interesting. Zeolite is particularly associated with the topic of detox. Besides heavy metals, are there other toxins that are removed by zeolite?
Yes, a lot of them. But in order to understand that, I will go into the basic structure a bit more. That means these so-called tetrahedra of the silicon oxide, which combine with the aluminum oxide, with the oxygen, there are many small cavities and channels, which have a diameter of 4 to 7 angstroms, that is 0.4 nanometers to 0.7 nanometers. That is extremely small cavities. And in these cavities, there is also this so-called crystal water, which is not freely available, and in these crystal structures there are also many minerals. This means that when lava rock falls into the sea or flows into the sea, this lava combines with the seawater. And that is why there is ultimately also a combination of these very stable structures with many minerals. And that means that the zeolite has, on the one hand, the important function of adsorption. That means the binding of pollutants, to bind and retain them. And at the same time, very important minerals like calcium and magnesium are released into the body. This means that this is a function that is interdependent, the so-called ion exchange. That means the binding of harmful substances and simultaneous release into the body is a very intelligent process that takes place and that also takes place selectively. That means the zeolite as a rock, when you lead into the body, only releases these minerals, also in the amount that the body actually needs.
I mean, it's super intelligent, right? Once again, you see how nature, how the body, how everything works together in wonderful harmony. It's, simply structured and acts together. That is very interesting. And it's also new for me to hear that you don't just give something away with zeolite, but that you really draw something very, very important for the body from it too.
Yes, zeolite can bind and absorb an incredible number of different pollutants due to its structure and its electrokinetic properties, so to speak. In nature, we always deal with charge carriers, and the minerals that we consume always have a certain charge. Whether they are positively charged or negatively charged, they are called cations and anions, and that is a constant interplay. In our membrane bodies and in the whole cells, there are always electron transfer processes going on, which means that the minerals and the mineral diversity have an enormous importance in the body when it comes to allowing metabolism to take place. And if a few of these minerals, for example, are not present or are present in the body in too high a dose or in too low a dose, there is an imbalance. And that's why it's very important that we have natural sources, a very broad spectrum of minerals, where the body can really take the things it needs and work with them. And that can, of course, vary from day to day. It depends on whether it is winter or summer, how we eat, what our mental state is, whether we are under stress, and so on. So the structure of zeolite provides that. There are over 100 different types of zeolite. The clinoptilolite is one of the zeolites that is really most valuable for our biological systems. This is the one that is most often used. And in the end, when you buy a zeolite product, you can find out whether it contains 90% or 95% clinoptilolite or less. And another important criterion is, of course, the particle size. The smaller and finer these particles are, the larger the surface, this exchange area, where all these processes take place, where pollutants can be bound in these small cavities, which simply means that the smaller the particle size, the better and more effectively it can be detoxified, and the more minerals can be released into the body. This is called cation exchange capacity.
These are words that I would have preferred to delete in chemistry lessons, to be honest. First of all, it still sounds paradoxical. The smallest has the greatest effect. The smallest particles have the largest surface area. Can you maybe explain that?
Well, let's imagine the surface of football. It has a certain surface where certain particles can adhere. Let's say we put a bit of glue on it, and if we break down this football into thousands or millions of small particles, then we have millions of small particles which have a surface that's much larger, because we have cavities and channels everywhere, and that makes the difference, so to speak. How many toxins can be bound? And with zeolite, the pollutants are really bound and excreted in the stool. Nothing gets into the body. The only other important criterion with zeolite is that colloidal silicon dioxide is released from the zeolite. And this can then enter the body as an incredibly important source to replenish the body with silicon.
Silicon is also a very important topic, I've heard. When we are born, the body has very high levels of silicon. We have a lot of silicon in the body, and over the course of our life, it becomes less and less. So it's very important to supply the body with it. And this is contained in zeolite as well.
Yes, so silicon that the body can use is released when it is ingested via the zeolite, and also, so to speak, when it is bound and excreted. Colloidal silicon dioxide is released, which can then enter the body and really be used as a silicon source, really as a larger quantity. The main problem we have is that these natural silicon compounds that we have in nature, for example in plants like nettle, bamboo, or also field horsetail, which have a very high concentration of silicon, are such a stable compound for the body that it has a lot of trouble and has to expend a lot of energy to dissolve these compounds in order to make them usable. This means that if I were to eat a lot of field horsetail, the body would only be able to use 5 or 10% of it efficiently. Ultimately, it is a question of how we can supply the body with silicon sources that are bioavailable, that it can use very well, in order to then use the silicon in its various functions in the body for support functions, structure formation for communication, signal transmission, and so on.
Okay, we'll make a separate topic, a separate interview about this. Back to zeolite itself. Silko, there are products that come from, different regions, where people say that this is the best product from the region. Is there something like that with zeolite? Because you said it is volcanic rock, right? Is the volcanic rock from, Iceland more valuable, of higher quality, or different than the one from the Eifel?
Well, with zeolite, there are a few criteria that distinguish a good zeolite, clean optilolite, from a not-so-good one. An important quality criterion is, of course, that there are certificates that it's free of pollutants and that there are no radioactive contaminants. This is relatively easy to prove through laboratory analysis. I had just said that the smaller the particles, the more efficient the zeolite is in its detox function. And today we have products on the market that have a particle size between 5, 6, and 7 micrometers. And of course, there are also products that are much cheaper, which have particle sizes of 50, 60, 90 micrometers. That means much, much larger particles. And when you take such a product, you also notice that it tastes a bit sandy and that it's not very pleasant. Many people may also have problems when it comes to the gastrointestinal tract, so they don't tolerate it very well and eventually stop taking it. So one important quality criterion is fine particles. And when we talk about 6 micrometers, for example, that's always a range. So, for example, if I have an indication of 6 micrometers on the product, you can assume that the range is from 1 micrometer to, for example, 20, 24, and 30 micrometers. Then there are also companies that provide the corresponding charts that have made analyses in which distribution curve is which particle size present. So that would already be one quality criterion. The finer the particle size, the better.
And it really makes a huge difference when I take it, I've noticed. I took zeolites which were really cement in my mouth, and I could hardly get them down. And they are really very fine products that are just really pleasant to drink. You can leave them in your mouth for a moment and then just swallow them without feeling like you've been to the North Sea in a storm.
A second quality criterion is the ratio of silicon to aluminum in the zeolite. Normally, good products have a ratio of 5:1. That means 5 parts silicon and only 1 part aluminum in this lattice structure, which is nevertheless solid. There are also products with 4:1 or 6:1 or 7:1, but a minimum criterion would be a ratio of 5:1. That the silicon really predominates. And the more silicon there is in a zeolite, the more of the colloidal silicon dioxide can be released into the body. that would be the next criterion. What's related to this is the finer the particles are, the higher the so-called cation exchange capacity, or CEC for short. Cations are calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, or iron ions. And the higher this exchange value is, the more the body can absorb from these minerals that are stored in the zeolite. During the process when the zeolite passes through the stomach into the small and large intestine and is then excreted. This means there are also certain values for this, but over 200 mg per 100 grams is an important value, which means there are a lot of minerals and ions that can be released into the body. Another criterion that is often mentioned is, does a zeolite have to be a medical product? Well, it definitely doesn't have to be a medical product, because you get a medical product by documenting a lot of things. And documenting things has nothing to do with improving the quality of a product. So there are manufacturers who have very, very good products on offer where all the documentation and verification procedures have been provided, but they don't want to go to all this trouble to have something certified as a medical product because there is a whole host of costs involved. Auditors, safety officers, quality management officers have to be paid. A lot of paper is produced, but this paper does not ensure that the quality improves. Because I think we have all experienced that pacemakers, implants, prostheses, which were all very well examined and were also medical products, or even the greatest blockbusters of medicine disappeared from the market at some point without a sound because they simply caused huge problems. It doesn't have to be a medical product. The quality should be right. The criteria that distinguish high-quality zeolite from inferior zeolite should be understandable and clear. And as long as manufacturers really issue certificates in the sense of what is the particle distribution, how is the particle distribution, it's all wonderful.
When I take zeolite, I put a spoonful in a glass of water that is as clean as possible, and then I take it. That means I leave it in my mouth for a moment, that it is absorbed through the mucous membranes, and then swallow it. What is the process like? What happens inside my body?
Well, normally we take, for example, a flat teaspoon of zeolite powder, which is about 3 grams, and stir it into 250 to 300 milliliters of water. Through this stirring process, very important processes already take place. Now it's a zeolite suspension, a so-called zeta potential is increased. I can go into this again later. All these small ions and minerals are now moving in this suspension. And if there are friction processes, this has an effect on the electrokinetic energy of this suspension, which means that the more I stir and then drink it freshly, the more energy is available to the body, so to speak, when it comes to the corresponding reactions.
That is really interesting. That means it really starts that early. I once heard from Dr. Rüdiger Dahlke in a fasting seminar, digestion begins in the mouth. So, that there's a lot of things really happening there. For me, for example, this is a very valuable piece of information, because who would tell you that this stirring can have such a big effect?
Well, the so-called zeta potential is built up by stirring, and when I drink it and then leave it in my mouth for 10 to 30 seconds, the area of binding pollutants and ion exchange already takes place there. This means the topic of oral hygiene already begins here. Then I swallow it, then this suspension enters the stomach. Let's assume we got up early in the morning and take this zeolite, then we might have a pH value of 1.0 to 1.5. And at the moment when I drink the zeolite solution or the suspension, this pH value increases to 4 or 6 or 6.5. That means that the extremely acidic environment is already raised a little. Now it's a slightly acidic environment. And then the zeolite migrates into the small intestine, where we then have a pH value of about 8, where there are many microorganisms where the metabolic processes take place, which really means that the food is broken down by the microorganisms. And then what the body needs reaches the blood via the mucous membrane of the small intestine. And everything that we don't want is then transported to the large intestine, so to speak, where it is excreted. This means that even if we have a normal nice dinner, for example, with fish that has not lived quite so organically and is perhaps contaminated with heavy metals, if I've taken zeolite beforehand, the detoxification can already take place here, so that these heavy metal contaminations or other environmental toxins cannot even reach the blood via the small intestine. So it's very important that this process already starts here, and that you can then optimally take the zeolite on an empty stomach if you tolerate it well. If you don't tolerate it well, the advice would be to reduce the dosage of the zeolite until the body no longer has a problem with it and everything works well.
What problems, if any, would arise? Is it an upset stomach or constipation? Or what might be the uncomfortable side effects? How can I tell that I should creep in more slowly?
We have very good sensory organs. They're finely distributed through the body, and if I take something and it doesn't do me good, I notice that. I get a feeling. Some people are very sensitive in the gastrointestinal area, they just notice that, and then they would either pack away the zeolite or they would take a capsule. But the problem with the capsule is the zeta potential, which means that with the capsule, which is not mixed with liquid, and these friction processes do not take place, I have a little less effect of the potential which the zeolite can actually develop. That's why dissolving it in water and stirring it is the most effective way. And that's why I can reduce the dosage until I don't have any problems with it and then slowly increase it again. This way I can use the full potential of the zeolite, and then I have the best effect as far as the detox area is concerned. The release of the minerals into the body, and of course the colloidal silicon dioxide that gets into the body and can be used.
Okay. So the finer it is, the more pleasant it is to keep these small sips freshly stirred in the mouth for a longer time. As I said, this cement feeling that still stays in my mind, to be honest. And these other minerals and building blocks of the zeolite that are released into the body, apart from the colloidal silicon, where does that take place and when?
This is done through the so-called ion exchange. At the moment when the zeolite really absorbs pollutants, it simultaneously releases various ions of minerals, these so-called cations. The body decides whether it needs iron, calcium, or magnesium. It's a process of binding pollutants and releasing minerals. The one does not work without the other, and the body regulates this as intelligently as it is, so no other substances are released. The body is so intelligent that it can regulate everything for itself. That is why we speak of a selective or intelligent ion exchange. It is also important to note that there is always information floating around on the internet or in certain channels that more aluminum is released via the zeolite and absorbed into the body. They also refer to studies that are carried out in a test tube where zeolite powder is poured into water with a pH value of 1 to 1.5 and stirred. Then it is left to stand for a very long time, and then it's determined that aluminum is released. Such studies, which are carried out in vitro, have nothing to do whatsoever with biological reality. Like I said, even if I have a pH value of 1.0 in the morning and drink water on an empty stomach, just water, the pH value is immediately raised. Water has a pH value of 7 or 7.5, and with the zeolite suspension it has a pH value of up to 8, which means that it's automatically raised. On the contrary, the reactions that now take place in the stomach ensure, for example, that excess stomach acid is bound and neutralized. So the issue of reflux and heartburn is treated and neutralized accordingly, which is also a very positive effect.
I mean, we know which corner these studies come from. The only ones interested in health are truly and really, us humans ourselves. And if it does as much good as it does to us, then we don't need to say anymore. What about pregnant women and children? what do you think? Should you take zeolite or not? Or when shouldn't you?
As long as humans and animals consist of cells, they can work with it. It's a natural stone that has existed for millions of years and has been used in nature for centuries and millennia, where there are many, many studies and that there's really no danger at all if you have the right product quality and don't mix anything together and ingest it. If you really have a clean optilolite, then it's a quality you can rely on. There can't be any risk or side effects because even if I take 20 grams a day, it will be excreted. What too much zeolite enters the body can only bind more. I might have a little constipation, but that's the only risk involved. This means there is no problem to use this as a pregnant woman because the toxins that we take in today, whether we want to or not, through the air, through food components that we do not know about, that are not even declared, it simply makes sense from a biological point of view to detoxify as early as possible. And with the zeolite, we also relieve the liver massively because I bind these toxins in the intestinal area and get them excreted, then the liver has much less to do. And this regular supply of zeolite can and should be taken throughout life because especially in old age, the silicon level decreases massively, which leads to the fact that we are less elastic, less flexible, that we become stiff, calcified, both physically and mentally. And that is why this silicon dioxide supply is so incredibly important, especially in old age, because we have an extreme deficiency. And whoever really uses it intensively and takes it even in larger doses has much more joy, is mentally and physically fitter. These effects on skin, hair, nails, on structures like bones, muscles, tendons, ligaments, and communication in the body are already very considerable. And since there are no risks or dangers, it makes a lot of sense.
It sounds to me like it's as important as the body getting a proper dose of vitamin D on a regular basis, for example. It does seem to be something, or that's the way I understand it, that it is something that the body really needs. You know, I mean, again, during these times we're in, especially.
Especially in these current times where we have to deal with all these different environmental pollutants and other things that we do to ourselves, zeolite is really an excellent possibility to bind and eliminate pollutants in a completely neutral way. This wonderful suction effect is also achieved in the body, that pollutants are sucked out of the tissue. These deposits of heavy metals in the brain which interfere with our communication or which can also act as a jammer in the body. It has many functions and effects in the body, which for me is really one of the most efficient methods in the long term to carry this out without taking any risks.
Wonderful. What about interactions? A person who is interested in their health also takes, one or the other food supplement probably. Is there anything where you should perhaps keep your distance from the zeolite, or where you say you shouldn't use both at the same time?
Well, in the area of medication, you should definitely keep a distance of at least half an hour or an hour or two from zeolite. You have to see how you can best integrate it into your daily routine, when, what is important, and then plan around it accordingly, because we are dealing with free electrons that can react. If I have medicines that are supposed to achieve a certain effect, their effect can either be strengthened or weakened. That is why it's important to keep a distance from medicine. And also with food supplements, vitamin C, for example, it's very reactive. It could react accordingly, which is not what we want. That's why I would always keep a little distance. From my point of view, a good thing is to do before lunch, when you really haven't eaten anything for like 5 or 4 or 5 hours. The body takes the zeolite half an hour before lunch, then either before dinner or, if that's not possible, before going to bed, when the body is almost finished with digestion, so that the body is able to regenerate overnight when we sleep, when it comes to the regeneration processes that mainly take place at night, when the so-called parasympathetic nervous system is active. It's of course nice if the body also has the resources to release the toxins.
Wonderful. And how many times a day do you use this for yourself? Should you just, ask yourself, just feel your body and get used to it, and then just see what dose you can cope with? Is this an approach that works?
Absolutely. I think a rough guide is 3 grams per day at a minimum. Professor Dr. Hecht took 6 or 10 grams a day for years. And I think anyone who has experienced him, even in interviews where he was over 90 years old, how fit he was, it already shows a lot. And then there are also enough studies that have shown that, especially at old age, if you take high doses, firstly, there are no side effects. Secondly, the mental and physical fitness is there. So I think 3 grams is a good starting amount. And if you're sensitive, start slowly, then really increase it so you get maybe 3 or 6 grams a day.
Amazing. Silko, I have the feeling that I can now choose which zeolite is suitable for me, what I want to look at and what I should look at. And yeah, it's definitely something that belongs in every body. Do you have anything additional you would like to give our viewers?
There are, of course, other ways of energizing or activating these particles, the zeolite powder. There are companies that have different processes where the particles are energized in the grinding process, when they are brought to this small particle size. We ourselves also have a process in which every particle is energized in a multi-stage process, so that, for example, silicon can enter the body. We know from the chip industry that silicon can store information. It can release information and absorb it. We know from the field of water activation that we often work with silicon dioxide, where information is released. In other words, you can program the silicon dioxide crystal and imprint it with useful biological information. And when each silicon dioxide particle enters the body, it can have an effect on an energetic level, which means that not only a material cleansing will take place, but also an energetic cleansing. Because the pollutant information from toxins, such as mercury or aluminum, is still present in the water, in the body's water, in the metabolism, even when we get the toxins out. So that's an additional effect that these energized products definitely have. They have a more profound effect from my point of view. So we can really talk about a material cleansing and also about an energetic cleansing.
So by a really subtle way, right? In a way so that all the soul's rubbish goes along with it.
Yes, because the information is stored and programmed in the body's water, even if the pollutant is out. We know this from water research. If I remove pollutants from the water through an osmosis membrane, for example, the information about the heavy metal compounds is still there. This means that it's important to energize the water afterwards and to treat it in such a way that, on the one hand, the pollutant information is deleted and new natural vibrations are imprinted. This is known, it's measurable, it's not mumbo-jumbo, it has been studied well for a long time.
Wonderful. My questions, for one, are answered for today. Thank you very much for all this wonderful information that you've provided, which is very valuable, and I look forward to our next episode. What do we want to talk about next time, Silko?
Well, we can just continue and discuss the topic of silicon a little bit, because there's so much to talk about what we don't know yet about what might be going on in the body, because no one has investigated it yet. But many indicators and studies point to it. Silicon, that's why we wrote a 4-part article about it, is one of the most important elements for me. That's why I call it the master element. For me, there is no more important element in the body than silicon. And I would like to elaborate on this importance a little bit more, so people understand why it is like that, according to which criteria silicon is so valuable.
Amazing. We will simply link the article here under the video, and you can read it if you are already interested, dear listeners, or if you would like to delve deeper into this topic. I hope you enjoyed it and that you will be back next time when it's time to ask DIA. And then I will ask Silko about silicon and many other things. Thank you so much, dear Silko.
Thank you very much, Dia.
See you next time. Thank you. Bye.